Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My dear brothers, sisters, viewers, friends of Iqra TV, welcome to part 2 of this edition of Real Talk. Today we're trying to, because I don't think we can ever be able to do justice to some of these stalwarts, pillars of Islam that we've lost in the last 6 years or so in particular. I want to talk about 3 people in particular, and that is Hafiz Patel Sahab, Moulana Hazrat Yusuf Mutara Sahab, and Hazrat Moulana Yaqoob Kavi Sahab, or Kasmi Sahab, as he was also known as well. 2 of my guests who were supposed to come and join me today, unfortunately have not been able to join me and talk about the other 2 great alims, or people who've been leading lights of Islam in this country, Hafiz Patel Sahab and Hazrat Moulana Yusuf Mutara Sahab. So inshallah, we'll do that on another day. But today we've been focusing as much as we can on Hazrat Moulana Yaqoob Kavi Sahab, Kasmi Sahab, on his work. Now, as I said at the beginning of the program, many people would have heard the name. Some people would have been blessed by seeing him and meeting him. But there are many, many people out there who have not been that fortunate. They may have heard of him in the sense that here was a scholar living in Dewsbury, who had been very instrumental in the Tabligh Jamaat movement, had been instrumental in setting up the Sharia Council, which helped hundreds and thousands of people in their day-to-day lives, not just around talaq issues, but other issues as well. And he was a man, as I said, in fact all 3 of them, but particularly Hazrat Moulana Yaqoob Sahab and Hafiz Patel Sahab, had a huge influence on me. I was the child of the 70s. Many of my contemporaries, like me, went to schools and colleges, and some went to universities as well. And many of them actually married non-Muslim women, ended up marrying non-Muslims. I lived on my own for 2 years from the age of 15 to 17 in digs, without any family members at all. I could have easily gone astray like some of my other contemporaries as well, and maybe completely, Allah na kare, but sort of gone away from the fold of Islam, as some of my friends did. But I think it's mainly because Hafiz Patel Sahab and Yaqoob Sahab, because as I said to you at the beginning, at the age of 11, I came into these people's lives, or they came into my lives, and they shaped me in the way that I am. I'm not the best of Muslims. I'm the biggest sinner, and ask every one of you to continue to make du'as for me, that Allah reforms me and makes me a better Muslim than I am at the moment. But I am fundamentally of the belief that it wasn't for the influence Hazrat Hafiz Patel Sahab and Moulana Yaqoob Sahab, I may not have been the person that I am. I may not be sitting here, and Allah knows where I would have been. And Hazrat Moulana Yusuf Mutara Sahab in my late life became a great influence on me. And I see all 3 of them, particularly Hazrat Moulana Yusuf Mutara Sahab, as one of my key mentors who guided me on a number of things that I did. When I was offered the opportunity to become the Deputy Lieutenant for West Yorkshire, I first asked for his guidance, and I thought before I accept the nomination by the Queen, I just wanted to make sure that Moulana Yusuf Mutara Sahab would give me some advice. And when I went to see him, and I asked him that I've been asked by Her Majesty the Queen to become a Deputy Lieutenant in West Yorkshire, and I was the first Muslim in the whole of the north of England to be given this opportunity. Hazrat Moulana Yusuf Mutara Sahab said to me straight away that we don't have Muslims, particularly from our school of thought, in this field, and it's important that you accept this nomination, and hopefully you may be able to shape its future. And I hope I'm doing it justice. And Hafiz Sahab, as I say, was a father to me. I lived in his house for a year from the age of 11 till 12, and because of family circumstances I had to leave again. And Hazrat Moulana Yaqoob Sahab, obviously being so closely associated with Hazrat Hafiz Patel, they were like 2 brothers, 2 peas in a pod. They helped shape Islam as we see it now and the way we practice it now. And as we've been talking to my guest, Siddiq Patel Sahab, who's a lawyer, family lawyer, works for a very large firm, who has been very, very closely associated with Hazrat Moulana Yaqoob Sahab, particularly the work of the Sharia Council that they've been doing together. But Siddiq Sahab, can I just, before we move on to the Sharia Council, as I said to you before, Hazrat Moulana Yaqoob Sahab was one of the few ulemas from those days who could speak Arabic fluently. I mean, some people, you know, obviously said a few words, but Hazrat Maulana Yaqoob Sahib was obviously a fluent Arabic speaker. And I remember vividly at the age of 11, 12, him phoning people and speaking Arabic and asking, you know, saying to people, please come and help this movement, come and join this movement, come out with us, and let's help, you know, bring our Muslim brothers and sisters into the fold of Islam. This was in the days when people came here as economic migrants. Their primary objective was to work, work and work, accumulate as much money as they could, send the money back home, and eventually go back home as well. So, you know, for them, that was their priority. But these two figures wanted to make sure that alongside that, they also made sure that they had held on to the Islamic principles and values. So how influential, in your opinion, was Hazrat Maulana Yaqoob Sahib in the Arabic world when it came to, you know, the bringing the Tabligh Jamaat movement to the forefront in them?
Well, he was instrumental. Chances are that if you'd spent any amount of time with Moulana Yaqoob Sahib, you will have heard him speak Arabic to somebody.
Oh, definitely.
Now, for non-Arabic speakers such as ourselves, it sounds good and amazing and something that we want to learn. But having spoken to his family members and having spoken to scholars, his Arabic was of the highest magnitude.
Oh yes, definitely.
And that is why he was chosen by the elders of Tabligh in India to actually go to the Arab countries, to Iraq, to Syria, to Lebanon, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and bring the Arab world onto Tabligh. And that in itself is a huge concept to grasp.
It's enormous, enormous, yes.
And I was, his son, Dr. Shabir Sahib, was informing me that he made quite a few trips to Iraq and Syria. On his first trip to Iraq, because the work of Tabligh was not known in the Arab world at that time. And you're talking 30, 40 years ago.
We're talking about the 60s.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So even
well, it's nearly 50 years ago.
Yeah, 50. Yeah, even longer than.
Yeah.
And because it was unheard of to go to a mosque and talk about, you know, Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam Sunnah and Qabr and Akhirah to Muslims, it was unheard of, and even more unheard of to spend the night in the mosque. They were wondering where to spend that night in Iraq when they were in Jamaat in Iraq, and Moulana Yaqoob Sahib, if you met him, you know that he was a sparkling personality. He would always engage anybody who he was speaking to. Such was his razor-sharp intellect and his wit. And he made friends with the muazzin, and the muazzin of that mosque let him spend time in the mosque. So that when he went the next time in Jamaat to Iraq, and he was in Jamaat, one of the Satis of the Jamaat said to him, "Where are we going to spend the night?" And that's when Moulana Sahib said to him, "Don't worry, I know somebody." And he went to...
He was a brilliant networker.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely brilliant networker, yes.
And again, you know, Tabligh is all about sacrifice, and one of the principles that you learn in there is the sacrifice of the Prophets ﷺ and the Sahaba. And I was informed that on his trip to Syria, when the work of dawah was still very new there, because they had no place to sleep at all, they would often sleep on the streets of Syria. Now, it's very difficult for us to comprehend, especially in this day and age of so much comfort and luxury. But the people who go out in the path of Allah, even for 3 days, when you make a little sacrifice of your own bed to sleep on a hard floor in a warm masjid, that's sacrifice enough. But to do so, to be the pioneer, to do something which hasn't been done for hundreds of years, for thousands of years, on the connection of deen, and to go to an Arab country and then to make that sacrifice and to be strong enough to make that sacrifice and to do something as bold as sleeping on the street for the connection of Rasulullah and the Akhirah.
Well, that's the ultimate sacrifice, isn't it?
That's why these people will always be revered on this earth, but in the Akhirah, their darajat will be so high, inshallah. And because of that sacrifice, and Hafiz Patel Sahib Rahmatullahi alayhi, their sacrifice of calling people to pray namaz in the masjid in the UK when it was cold, when it was snowing, you and I can call ourselves Muslims today.
Definitely.
And we have a Muslim mahol in the UK today. And as you said earlier, so many people, so many ulama kiram thank this sacrifice and place this sacrifice as the foundation for the Islamic educational system set up by the madrasas in the UK, which has given us a basic level of knowledge of Islam as practicing Muslims. So, and alhamdulillah, in his life, you could tell when you spoke to him, through the way he spoke to you, through the kindness of his words. I mean, here was a scholar at the top of his game, right?
Definitely.
Let's make no bones about it. Here was a scholar whose mind was unparalleled. He had I would call a supercomputer memory. Alhamdulillah, he did hifz in 6 months after he became, and that was after he became alim. And as an interesting side note to that, mashallah, last year during COVID, his grandson, so Dr. Shabir's son, Hafiz Zaki, broke Moulana Yaqoob Saab's record of 6 months,
mashallah.
and he did hifz in 5 months.
Subhanallah.
So
they have the genes.
The genes are there,
The genes are there.
and the tawfiq from Allah is there, and it's all because of the sacrifice. And I was told that Moulana Saab was a very good adopter of technology as well. And he was, as soon as he learned that he could type Urdu on the computer. He had the whole system set up in his front room. He had a big photocopier as well, which we would assist him with when preparing Sharia Council case files. Now, once he was, he also wrote published many books as well, alhamdulillah. At least 8 to 10 different publications. And one of the instances, he was preparing a manuscript in Urdu, and he lost all his work on the computer. What would we do? We would probably get frustrated, get angry, and maybe come back to it later on or whatever. Not Moulana Saab. Moulana Saab picked up a pen and then wrote everything down straight away again, and just carried on. And he was somebody that if he was speaking to us right now and we mentioned a telephone number to him, half an hour later, he would be able to remember that telephone number.
He had a fantastic memory.
His retention was something else, mashallah. And that comes from sacrifice, you see. And Hafiz Saab, mashallah, rahmatullah as well, there's so many stories about him as well and how he affected the lives of people and the hearts of people. And that was done through the qurbani that they made.
Oh, definitely, yeah, definitely. I mean, they gave up so much in order for us to have the knowledge and the ability to practice our Islam now.
Absolutely.
You know, if it wasn't for their sacrifices, you know, we wouldn't be, as you said, may not have been, you know, in the position that we're in at the moment. So, you know, my dear friends and, you know, my viewers, I mean, whether you knew him or not, my purpose today is to try and ensure that we recognize the sacrifice, the dedication, the commitment that people like Hazrat Moulana Yaqoob Saab, Hafiz Patel Saab, and Moulana Yusuf Mutara Saab, and there are others as well, but these, in my opinion, you know, are the pillars that now we stand on as a Muslim community in this country. You know, it is their hard work, their efforts, their dedication that has brought to us the opportunity for us to practice our faith in the way that we do. If it wasn't for them, Allah knows where we would be. I mean, one of the, you know, the work that Hazrat Moulana Yaqoob Saab started, inshallah, will continue with people like yourself and Moulana Ilyas Dalal and others, and that is the Sharia Council. Now, I know that when the Sharia Council first started, they got a lot of flack from the right-wing press in this country as well, and they still do to a certain extent. But I mean, he had a unique way of responding to that, wasn't it? You know,
he had a talent for resolving people's problems, and he was involved in dispute resolution for Muslims and families way before he set up the Sharia Council. And people would come to his house and he would resolve family disputes, inheritance disputes. And it was that front room of his house which was the room that he spent the majority of his day in up until the day that he died. And that's where he set up the Sharia Council. And he would receive phone calls at all times of the day. Through observing him, I learnt how important it was to give time to somebody who was going through a problem in order to be able to fully understand their problem and then provide the right advice. Something solicitors are taught. He was helping Muslims resolve their disputes well before the Sharia Council. And then he saw this need and truly ahead of his time, willing to talk about issues such as domestic violence, willing to talk about issues such as forced marriage, and willing to say very clearly, very loudly, very publicly that these things are not Islamic in nature. That our Prophet, peace be upon him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, never once in his 38 years of marriage lifted his finger towards any of the Azwaj Mutahharat. And that he, when talking about the issue of forced marriage, for example, reminding people of the 4 criteria that Islam places on choosing a marriage partner. And when I saw him talk about this to other scholars, I could see that by talking to them about this, he was giving them confidence in themselves to talk about it in a public domain. As somebody who is who specializes in family law and somebody who is linked with the Muslim community quite strongly, I feel that not enough is done from the pulpit and from the minbar to talk about these issues. Now, I appreciate there is delicacy and that it must be approached with sensitivity. But the Muslim community of 2022 in Great Britain is very different to the Muslim community of 1994, when the Sharia Council was set up by Moulana Sahab. And people are more willing to listen, because I think one of the biggest things is that because lots of people have either gone through themselves or have family members go through the problems which have been resolved by people like Moulana Yaqoob Sahab. I mean, we alhamdulillah are lucky enough to talk about what he's done on this show. Lots of bayans have been done in the last few days. But I can tell you, Iqbal Bhai, and I can tell the viewers that there will be hundreds, if not thousands of men, women and families who will not be able to find the correct platform, but whose lives have been touched for the better and their family problems resolved by the assistance of Moulana Yaqoob Sahab. And not just in resolving the problems, it's the way.
I think one of the things I've sort of noticed, when in the early days of the Sharia Council was that he was able to traverse, separate the cultural aspect of people's lives to the religious aspect.
Absolutely.
Because a lot of people still stick to the culture as opposed to the Islamic values, the Islamic principles and the Islamic rules. And he was absolutely fantastic at saying, "Bhai, that is culture, right? This is what Islam says."
Yeah.
Right? And that sometimes people fail to understand. But he was really absolutely phenomenal and very, in the way he explained to people. So then realize that, people would realize, yeah, what Hazrat Maulana Sahib is guiding us with is what, we've been lacking, that knowledge. So he imparted that knowledge. Sometimes people stick to a particular principle thing, but that is not Islamic principle, it's a cultural principle.
Indeed, indeed.
And that was a separation that he was very good at trying to explain to people and bring them into the reality of what Islamic principles and values were.
And he would incur personal difficulty if it meant that in sticking to his point.
Oh yeah, I know.
There's a very famous English phrase that let justice be done though the heavens may fall. And Moulana Yaqoob Sahab was somebody who, at personal cost maybe, he had no interest in status, he had no interest in position, but if it came to speaking the truth or highlighting something which was in accordance with Sunnah or Sharia or not in accordance with Sunnah and Sharia, he would not hesitate to do so. And if there was a disagreement, he would respectfully listen to you and he'd respectfully tell you that he disagreed, and he would always counsel patience and say that the matter would be in Allah's hands.
In your view, this culture and sort of religious thing, how influential do you think he was in enhancing women's rights under Islamic law?
I'd like you to think about it this way, that Moulana Yaqoob Sahab was a scholar from one of the more traditional seminaries in India, who came to the UK, and through the work that he did, and if we're just talking about the Sharia Council work, he did lots of other work, mashallah, as we've discussed today, but through the work that he did with the Sharia Council, he was a traditional, when viewed from a Western perspective, Islamic scholar who was a pioneer in advocating women's rights, in that, in helping them free themselves of marriages which were not working. And you must remember one point, that and this is one thing that viewers have to remember as well, that resolving an issue when it comes to a difficult marriage or even a failing marriage is nuanced and complex. But one of the bases that scholars always look at is the Islamic concept of nikah. Are the rights of nikah being fulfilled? And through their knowledge, and Moulana Sahab through his knowledge would marry the factual matrix of the particular case that was before him, and and he would do it in every single case with the Sharia criteria. And the nature of disputes is such that there is always going to be one party that is less happy than the other. And he was resolute and strong enough to stand by what he said, because he knew that ultimately he would be making a decision which would be assisting the families. And though in the short term it may seem that you are, the simplistic way is, you are breaking somebody up. It's not the case. When you analyze the situation, perhaps there has been domestic violence that has gone unreported for so long. Perhaps there may be other elements which is not fulfilling the rights of a nikah. Once you analyze that in detail, and in doing so, he developed a process and a procedure, which was when I observed his process in the Sharia Council, and when I looked at the process of divorce through the English courts at that time. Now, obviously, the law has changed as of April this year. It was very similar. He undertook an investigative process. He asked people to put their points in writing. He gave people the right to respond. And as the Quran commands, he explored reconciliation at first, but he also understood that if there was a risk to life, for example, or something else which wasn't Islamic, or a risk to safeguarding or welfare, and which affected, and primarily it affected women, because culturally women have a lower status than men in the Indo-Sub-Asian culture. But that's not religion.
Yeah, that's the divide I'm talking about.
And he separated that. And he was very good. Time and again, I was at the Sharia Council meetings when when not only the parties would be there, but sometimes families would be there as well, especially the parents. And he would take the time to explain to them that, look, what you're doing in seeking this dissolution of your marriage, for example, for your daughter or for your son, you're not doing anything wrong from an Islamic perspective. You're not doing something which is haram. But Islam gives you this option because, for example, your daughter is in danger, or maybe your grandkids are in danger, or your son is in danger. He would always do it in light of Quran and Sunnah, and he would always have a panel of scholars, but he would be very quick and very strong on separating Islam and culture.
I mean, that is one of the strengths that I remember. He would not mince his words, that the truth is going to be out there. He would not compromise his principles and values, which is the strength that he had. Now, sometimes people may not agree with it, but he would not compromise and say, look, whether you accept it or you don't accept it, that's your decision. But this is my ruling. My dear brothers and sisters, we've tried to do justice today to try and sort of celebrate the life and achievements and contribution of one particular individual in particular. As I say, I want to do 3 programs. I was to do one program today about 3 people, three, Hazrat Hafiz Patel Sahib Rahmatullah Alayh, Hazrat Moulana Yusuf Matara Sahib Rahmatullah Alayh, and Hazrat Moulana Yaqoob Sahib Rahmatullah Alayh. There's enormous sacrifice and contribution that they've made to Islam and our community. And I don't think there's nothing we can do will ever be able to do justice to them. I ask you all to remember Hazrat Moulana Yaqoob Sahib in particular in your du'as, that may Allah give him the highest place in Jannah. Give his family, his sons, his daughter, the sabr, jameel at this particular moment in time. And thank Allah for giving us Hazrat Moulana Yaqoob Sahib for the short time that we had with him. And I hope that all of you will remember his contribution and will celebrate it and continue to remember him in his du'as. I hope today's program has given you some insight into the man that he was. To me, he was like a father figure, and without his influence, I may not have been sitting here. Maybe I may have been a Muslim, Allah forbid. But whatever I am today, he has a large part in my life. He with Hafiz Sahib. Thank you very much for watching. Inshallah, I'll be back with you soon. Take care. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And I thank my eminent guest, Siddiq Patel, for his contribution, without which we would not have had this program today. Jazakallah. May Allah bless you as well.
Thank you for having me on.
Inshallah, I'll see you next week.